Hey everyone, welcome back to Love Wins. I've probably bitten off more than I can chew today, but the time has come to deal with some of the issues that are keeping us from hearing each other, understanding each other, and most of all, and most importantly, hearing and understanding Jesus. So, simple illustration to begin. Here's Jesus in the center. You have north, west, east, and south. People are all moving towards Jesus. If the people in the west describe what they see as they move towards Jesus, they're all going to describe pretty much the same thing. The people from the east who are moving towards Jesus are going to describe something absolutely and completely different. The people coming from the north will see a little bit of what's happening from the west, a little bit of what's happening from the east, but nothing from the south, and so on and so forth. You see, it all depends where you're coming from, what it is that you're going to see. And the problem becomes that we're only willing to listen to, talk to, have association with those people who are coming from the same perspective as us and see things like we see them. It's very limiting. One of the great complaints among Christians today is how intolerant the LGBTQ movement is. And I want to tell you that they didn't learn that in a vacuum. They learned it from us. Let me illustrate. So last week we talked about Alistair Begg, and I know most of my viewers at this point are either Seventh-day Adventist or affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church in some way, and many of them are Canadian, so you probably don't even know who he is, and that's fine. But I just need to spend some more time explaining who he is to make this all make sense. Alistair Begg is one of the most respected Christian pastors in the United States. He's from Scotland. He's been pastoring in Ohio for many, many years, decades. He is very clear on what the Bible teaches about LGBTQ issues. His views are very traditional. And he openly teaches it. He's not scared of what he believes. He's honest about what he believes. He has a perspective, and he's confident in it, and he teaches it. I'm not here to debate whether he's right or wrong. That's hardly the point. A few weeks ago, he deviated, some would say, from his viewpoint. He would say he did not deviate. He had a letter written to him by a grandmother who had a granddaughter who was getting married. It was a transgender wedding. There's no details about whether both people in the marriage were transgender, whether one of them was, none of that. There's no details about that. The grandmother wanted to know how she should relate to this wedding. So Alistair is a grandparent himself at this point, and he was quite moved by the letter, and so he arranged a meeting, and he met with her. And one of the questions he asked her, which all of his detractors since have completely ignored, he asked her, is it clear to your granddaughter what you believe about marriage? That you believe that marriage is between one man and one woman for life. Is she clear on that? And the grandmother said, absolutely. So he said, she's clear that if you go to this wedding, you're not going because you support what she's doing. You're going because you love her. She's clear that I do not support her wedding. And then Alistair said, well, if that's the case, I think you should go. And the grandmother was quite surprised by that. Did not expect him to say that. And he further explained and said, if she's expecting you not to go, so she will gain nothing or learn nothing by you not going. That's just doing what she expects. But if you go and show her that you love her in spite of how you view what's happening, that will catch her off guard. That will show her a bigger side of mercy and grace than she is expecting. I think you should go. Then he shared in a sermon the conversation that he had and the advice that he gave. And to use a cliched term, all hell broke loose. In the wake of it, most of those who previously had great respect for him have withdrawn to the point where he has been uninvited from major speaking engagements. His radio program, which is aired all over the US and in some places in Canada, has been canceled. So the right complains about cancel culture from the left, yet as soon as something happens that they don't like, they cancel. The Christians complain about intolerance from the left, but as soon as something happens they don't like, they're intolerant. And if you want to read about real hardcore intolerance and hardcore canceling, go back to the Christian church of the Middle Ages in Europe and see what that was like. Now, the left didn't learn this on their own. They didn't invent intolerance. They're simply reflecting what Christianity has been doing for a very long time. And when I say Christianity, I'm talking about the organizations that call themselves Christians. I'm not talking about actual Christianity, because I don't see in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John where Jesus canceled anyone. No one. People will be canceled in the end, lost in the end, not going to heaven in the end, not because Jesus canceled them, but because they canceled themselves. Think about it. Judas was one of Jesus' disciples. He was stealing money from them, and Jesus knew it. He was planning to betray Jesus, and Jesus knew it. Jesus never called him on it. He did not expose him. Even at the very end, Judas brought everything that he did on himself. They were all his choices. They were all his doing. He canceled himself. Jesus just was Jesus. Unapologetically and unwaveringly, Jesus was Jesus. And people could choose to join him, fight him. Some chose to kill him, but it didn't change him. He was who he was, and he was not threatened by people who did not appreciate who he was or didn't agree with him. He just kept being who he was. And a Christian or a version of Christianity that is threatened by anything that isn't in agreement with what it thinks or what she thinks, it's not Christ-like. We can call it Christianity, but it does not reflect the Jesus of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It just does not. Let me illustrate something else. We tend to get stuck in the rut of thinking that there's a right answer and a wrong answer to every question. So, for example, in this case, the question would be, should a Christian who does not believe that a man marrying a man or a woman marrying a woman or whatever other variation there might be, they don't believe that that's really marriage, should they attend a ceremony that is called marriage, but they don't believe is marriage? That's the question. And the thinking is there's only one right answer and one wrong answer to that question. And I want to propose to you that that's blatantly false. That circumstances do play a part in answering the question. When Peter was in prison, in Acts chapter 11, I believe. You can look it up. The prison was opened in the middle of the night. An angel led him by hand out of the prison through the streets and to the home where people were praying for him. In Acts chapter 16, Paul and Silas are in prison, and there's an earthquake in the middle of the night, and the prison's doors are opened and their shackles fall off. And Paul and Silas stay in prison. They don't go anywhere. They don't leave. So if we were to ask the question, when God delivers you from prison, when you're in prison and God opens the prison miraculously, should you stay or should you go? If you only read Peter's story, you'd say you should go. If you trusted only in human logic, you would say, well, of course you should go. But then Paul's story and Silas' story comes along and they don't go. And it ends up being key to what happens next. That their staying causes a series of chain of events that would never have happened had they just fled. So there isn't one answer to that question. Every circumstance requires its own answer, because we're supposed to be dynamically following Jesus, not checking off a box of wrong and right answers. So if I made a habit of running around to all the LGBTQ weddings and taking selfies with the bride and bride or the groom and groom or whatever the case may be, I would be showing to the world that I support this. And if I don't believe that that's really marriage, I shouldn't be doing that. But if I'm a grandmother or a grandfather, and I believe that in the long run, I'm going to do more good than harm by showing my granddaughter or grandson that I love them in spite of their choices, then maybe I should go. One of the main arguments that people are using against Alistair Begg's advice is that if you go to a wedding like that, you're supporting it. That your presence equals support. But they don't use the Bible to make that point. They just state it as if it's an empirical fact that cannot be denied. But when I read the Bible, I find situations where people are present in things that they do not support. For example, and there are several, probably many more than I've thought of. When God led Israel out of Egypt, he declared that they were his people. Now, by declaring that they were his people, it would be logical to assume that everything that they did from then on reflected who God is and what God wanted. But we know that's not the case. So at Sinai, Moses goes up into the mountain and they think he's not coming back, and they build this golden calf. And if you know the Bible at all, you know the story. If you don't know the Bible, they just think Moses is their leader. He's dead. We need a new leader. So they build a golden calf to lead them, a God to go before us. And God tells Moses, you better get back down there because things aren't good. So Moses starts coming down the mountain. He hears first the partying and the hoopla, and then he sees what they're doing, and it's nasty. I'm not going to go into those details. And he physically smashes the covenant that God had given him on Sinai, wrote with his own fingers on 2 tables of stone. He smashes them because in Moses' mind, God is no longer he's not going to endorse this. He's not going to be our God anymore. Why would he go along with us in this craziness? It's over. But God stays. And there's this conversation between God and Moses where God tells Moses it's time to move on from Sinai. He says, I'm not going unless you come with us. And God says, I'm going to come with you. Yeah, but I'm not going unless I am going to go. But I'm not going unless you come, but I am going to go with you. Moses is so convinced that God's not coming that he cannot hear God plainly saying that he is coming. And when it finally dawns on Moses what God is saying, that in spite of their failures, in spite of them misrepresenting him, in spite of them doing things that he 100% does not endorse, that he's staying with them, Moses asks, show me your glory, which in simple terms would be, who are you? Because you're not who I thought you were. So show me who you actually are. And when God shows himself, he's described as merciful, long-suffering. You see, God is not like we are, but we tend to make him like we are. And if you happen to believe that being gay or otherwise sexually keeps you out of heaven, that there's no hope for those people, I want to assure you that the Bible has a lot worse things to say about idolaters than it does about the immoral. It says bad things about the immoral, don't get me wrong. But it says worse things about idolaters. And do you know what an idolatrous person is? It's a person who forms God in their own image. It's a person who makes a God like themselves and then attributes God with those characteristics. So if I'm selfish, God's selfish. If I'm a white nationalist, God's a white nationalist. If I'm a chauvinist, God's a chauvinist. If I'm racist, God's racist. If I'm intolerant, God's intolerant. If I would burn people forever and ever in hell to show them who's boss, then that's what God would do. It's idolatry. That's why the Bible's full of idolatry, because humans have been reshaping God into their own picture from the beginning. And we continue to do it. And when a well thought out, well articulated, well meaning preacher, whether he's right 100% or wrong 100% or some mix of the two, dares to present a God who's more compassionate than we think he ought to be, we cancel him. So we can put the walls back up and keep out any voices and any hint that God might be different than what we've decided he is. The whole reason why I do what I do, and I don't do it for money, I don't make a penny off this, that's not part of my job. I do it because I want a voice out there encouraging you to rethink how you see Jesus. And I want to practically tell you this. You're coming to God from some perspective. East, west, north, south, northeast, southwest. And you're going to be tempted in your journey to only surround yourself with people who think like you, and to shut out the voices of people who don't think like you. But the truth is, all the perspectives around that circle together make up the full picture of Jesus. Because somebody coming from the east might see only the merciful side of Jesus, and a person coming from the west might see only the justice side of Jesus. And alone, those are two very, very different perspectives. And they will end up fighting each other or shutting each other out, insisting that what they see is all there is. But Jesus is bigger than what you see, and he's bigger than what I see. And I'm not here to tell you how to think or that I'm right. I'm just here to encourage you to think. And let's try and be more broad-minded. Because when Jesus came, his own people killed him because they couldn't tolerate thinking of a different kind of God than the one they were comfortable with. We'll see you next week.